So, today's lesson, depth of field. We are going to, first of all, review the last lesson, which was shutter priority. So, let's talk about shutter priority. What about it? First of all, what is it on your camera?
TV.
TV. Because Canon doesn't know how to spell shutter.
Wait, you weren't?
Shutter priority was the previous lesson, and TV. And what's the big deal about shutter priority? First of all, what does it do?
It puts your light meter in the middle all the time.
Puts your light meter in the middle. What do you have to do?
The shutter speed.
You pick the shutter speed. The camera picks the f-stop. You also have to pick the ISO. So really, the camera's only picking one thing for you, but just like you said, it puts the light meter in the middle. Okay, so what happens if there's not enough light? If they can't get an f-stop low enough?
Bounces at you, or like it flashes.
It flashes at you. Say, hey, can't do this. Okay, so that's actually kind of cool, right? Because now you don't have to worry about constantly making adjustments and putting the light meter in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good answer. All right, so today's lesson is aperture priority. So everybody turn your mode dial to AV. Okay, so in aperture priority, you pick the f-stop. The camera picks the shutter speed. You still have to pick the ISO. All right, so again, what would be good about that? Puts the light meter in the middle. All right, now, for aperture priority, you've got to be careful. And the reason why I teach manual before I do the priority modes is because when you start taking pictures and they have to be like, you know, 1/8 of a second long, 1/4 of a second long, what happens when you start getting to shutter speeds that are that slow?
Tripod.
You need a tripod. You've got to hold it very still. I'll handheld at 1/4 of a second. I'd be pretty amazed if it ended up being in focus, right? What's the bottom threshold for something that's not moving and you're not moving? 30th of a second. That's right. Okay. What if you want to freeze basic motion? What is the what's the around the shutter speed that you're going to need?
It's like 200.
Yeah, around there. Between 125 and 250. I usually say 250 to freeze basic motion. Okay? What if you wanted to like freeze a volleyball that's being thrown? What do you figure you'd need?
500 maybe?
500, you could start at 500.
Yeah,
you might even
go
need to go up to
higher, yeah.
800 or 1,000th of a second. It depends on how hard they're throwing it. Okay? If it was me, I'm not a hard thrower. You just 30th of a second would probably be fine. So, okay, so now that we've gone over those shutter speeds, the reason why I was asking about the shutter speeds is because your aperture, in aperture priority, the camera is going to pick the shutter speed for you. And it won't be flashing at you, except in very rare occasions. Instead, it's going to pick a shutter speed, if there's not enough light, that's super slow. Okay, do you understand what I mean? Right, so you've got to keep an eye on it. When you're shooting an aperture priority, you have to keep an eye on the shutter speed. And if it's too low, you need to bump up your f-stop, or not your f-stop, you need to bump up your ISO. Okay, so let's do an example right now. Oh, by the way, where we're going with this is once we learn how to do this, we're going on to depth of field, because that's what changes how deep you can see into the back and how blurry you can make the background. So that's kind of where we're going. Okay, so aperture priority. Everybody put your f-stop at 5.6, please. Oh, and you will notice that in aperture priority, your camera doesn't, in order to change the f-stop, you don't need to hold down the button with your thumb, the AV button. You just turn the regular dial. As a matter of fact, what happens in a priority mode when you hold down the AV button with your finger and you change it? Yeah, it changes the light meter, right? It's called exposure compensation. So if the camera is shooting things too brightly, okay, then you can bump it up or bump it down, whatever it is that you want. Okay, so if you're in the habit of changing the f-stop by holding your thumb down in aperture priority, you got to get yourself out of that habit, because otherwise you're making the camera take dark pictures or whatever. Okay, so everybody at 5.6 now? Okay, and let's go, it's kind of dark outside still, so let's go to ISO 800. And take a light meter reading of a person across the room from you. You can zoom in with your lens, because we're at f5.6. And shout out your shutter speed. What shutter speeds have you got?
30th,
30th, 25th. Okay, so Matt, you're at 25. What will you have to do in order to take a clear picture?
Light meter up.
But no. Well, you
The ISO up.
okay. The ISO's got to go up. Okay. Why would it not work to put the light meter up? You say, whoa, put the light meter in the middle. What's the big deal? Light meter's already in the middle, right?
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's saying that 25th of a second, you need, in order to take it not a blurry photo, you need to have more room on your ISO in order to be able to bump up the shutter speed. Okay? All right. So that's f5.6. That's letting in a lot of light. What's actually the lowest that the camera goes to? 3.5. But what's the little trick that you've got to do in order to get 3.5?
Turn your ISO down.
No.
Shutter speed.
Your lens has to be made shorter. You've got to change your lens to 18. Right? Now you can go down to 3.5. What's the problem with taking a picture of a person at 18? 18 millimeters on your lens.
Super small.
It is quite a ways away, but you could just move closer. Then what does that do to them?
Isn't it like really?
It's a wide angle, right? And most people don't really want to be taken with a wide angle lens. Okay? You guys are, you know what I mean? Here, let's do it. Let's spread each of us out. Okay, so 18 millimeter, go down to 3.5. Get really close to the person in front of you and take a picture of their face.
Funny.
Go ahead.
I'm saving that.
Get even closer. 3.5, you're at 18.
Duke Stone. Rodeo space.
Yeah. See what I mean? See, that's kind of worked.
That's funny though.
Yeah, it is kind of fun, right? But it's not the most flattering of photos, right?
I don't know.
Okay, you don't have permission to use that. All right. So, yeah, most people don't want pictures of themselves at 18 millimeters, but you can get some funny looking distortions and all that kind of thing. It's up to you as the photographer. So, the advantage of going down to 18 is you let in more light. Okay, you get down to 3.5. You'll notice that at 3.5, your shutter speed was probably good enough to take the shot, right?
Mine was at 20, it went down.
20.
Yeah, it went down 10.
That's interesting. You must have.
It wasn't because it was pointing at you.
Right.
And the studio light's probably right there.
Yeah, you got it. That's exactly it. There's less light in that corner. Cooper's sort of like a black hole kind of thing, enveloping the light. Okay, so, yes, so what did you do when you were at a 20th of a second?
No, I didn't change it, but I was going to change my ISO.
Yes, that's what you should have said. I changed my ISO, Mr. Tyrrell, because I would never take a picture that was blurry.
No, never.
Ever. Okay.
Pointer shoots.
So, yeah, I know. All right, so so there we go. Basically, you need to realize you need to keep an eye on your shutter speed. It can also go the opposite direction too. If you see, oh wow, I've got a 60th of a second now. What can you do with your ISO?
Have it.
Yeah, bump your ISO down. So, so shooting an aperture priority is a little bit of work, but it's still going to work out quite nicely for you, and you're going to see why right now. Oh, by the way, everybody know what depth of field actually is?
Yes.
Okay, what is it, Matt?
The background blur.
Yes. Okay, that's a shallow depth of field when the background is blurry. Are your depth of field cheat sheets? I'll actually split this in half, that way and that way. So you can see the examples at the beginning there of picture, excuse me, with a shallow depth of field first and a deep depth of field second. What's the big deal? Why would you want a shallow depth of field?
Focus on the certain things.
Yeah. What's that certain thing that we call in photography? A focal point.
That one.
Right? Okay, yeah. So that's really useful, right? Like remember those pictures that you took in intro to photography where there were like ugly cars in the background and all that kind of thing? So imagine if you were able to get a shallow depth of field and just blur over those so that you could only see the focal point in front. Very helpful, right? Well, if that's the case, why would you ever want deep depth of field?
That's what you want.
Maybe there's something nice in the background.
Exactly. Maybe there's something nice in the background. Okay, so my family and I were traveling out to BC, and anybody who's traveled the Yellowhead out to BC knows that past Jasper, there's Mount Robson. Once you get into BC, Mount Robson, it's Canada's tallest mountain. It's really quite spectacular. Hey, it's pretty cool. And there's a road stop along the way, like a viewing point, where they sell ridiculously expensive food, and you're able to just sort of stand there and go, wow, that's a big mountain, right?
And a big hot dog.
And so the kids were kind of driving us nuts a little bit, and my wife was like, we're stopping here. Okay, sure. We get out, and my wife's like, take a picture. Okay, fine. I grabbed my camera, click, and I looked at it. Now, my settings were a low f-stop, a long lens, and I was fairly close to them. That meant, those three things together, meant that I had a shallow depth of field. The background was completely blurry. Okay? I could have taken the photo in my backyard. It wouldn't have changed anything. You could not see any scenery behind them at all. And I looked at it and kind of went, whatever, because I really wanted to get driving. And my wife said, let me see it, let me see it. I'm like, no, okay. And she looks at it, and needless to say, we had to take it again. Oh, of course, she didn't really care that I wasn't in it, but it had more to do with the fact, like, hey, we're in front of Mount Robson. This is beautiful. Show the mountain. Right? So I needed to change all of my settings to the opposite. I had to go to a high f-stop, a short lens, and I moved further back.
Completely blur his family out.
Yeah, I just cropped them out completely, took a picture of the mountain.
Why don't you show the mountain?
Yeah.
And here's a
So-
picture of my family blurred out.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
here's
yeah.
a picture of the mountain blurred out.
And the second photo was them with the mountain. You could see it quite clearly in behind. That's an example of not only spousal abuse, but of where you would want a deep depth of field. If you want to show context, Another example of making sure that I have a deeper depth of field is when I take a picture of a large crowd of people. Like at the end of the year, we always do a picture of the grads out in front of the school, and I get up on this big ladder and they all hang out on the patio and we take a casual picture of the whole grad class, right? That would be really silly if I use shallow depth of field for that, right? Because then like it would be focused on like on one person and everybody else would be out of focus. Now they might think that's cool, okay, but it's not exactly something you want to show to the grad class as like, you know, as like a group photo. That'd be pretty hilarious though if it was done as like a team photo for hockey or something like that. It's like one player in focus, everybody else is blurry.
Be like your kid or something.
Yeah, that's what I was
Just your
thinking.
kids in focus.
Maybe I offer that as a photographer, shallow depth of field. Blur everybody else out except your child.
You think your kid's more important than the others? Weird.
Put that on my friend.
Okay. Anyway, so now that we know why we would want to play around with depth of field, let's do this, right? So first of all, we're going to practice with these boxes right here, because everybody wants to take pictures of boxes. And the reason why I do this is because the focal point is going to be the red rectangle. Okay? All right. May I borrow your camera, please? Okay. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get in here close. You don't have to have the whole box in here. You need to be up close. I'm going to change the focus dot over to the far right, so I'm doing kind of a rule of thirds thing. Okay, I want a long lens and a low f-stop, which is 5.6. Okay, so I've got 125th of a second. What can I do with my ISO?
I don't know. No,
Yeah, if I cut 125 in half, that puts me down to 60. Good, I can cut 60 in half and give me 30. Good. I'll put my ISO down twice. Okay, I'm exactly at a 30th of a second. I'm as close as I can get. And boom. Ta-da! Take a look at this. See that? See that shallow depth of field? See that blurriness?
Nice.
Nice. Now I'm going to do completely the opposite. Going to 18. Going to put my f-stop up to about 13. And I'm stepping back a little bit. All right. So now I'm focusing and I have a quarter of a second. Okay? A little slow. A little slow. Okay? So 4, double 4 you get 8. Double 8 you get 16. Double 16 it actually will take us to 30. Okay? Although we know that 16 plus 16 is 32, but the camera is being nice to us. Okay, so I have to put my ISO up 3 stops. Oh, that's awesome. It's exactly a 30th of a second. I love it when stuff like that works. Okay, now please look here. You'll notice that my shot is actually fairly far out. And now I'm going to just zoom on in to show you. See how both boxes are now in focus? See that? Right there. So when you go to a higher f-stop, you're going to need to put your ISO up. Do you remember in Lightroom where we played with noise reduction? Remember that? Okay, this is where you're going to want to use it. Okay, because you can give yourself, you can take a fairly noisy photo, like with a high ISO, and make it look a lot better. by playing with that noise reduction. Okay? Okay, so let's all take a shallow depth of field picture. So what do we need with a shallow depth of field?
Low f-stop.
Low f-stop. Okay? It's written on the it's written on this page in front of you. Totally fine to read it. A low f-stop, a long lens. Okay? So put your lens at 55, not 18. I see some people at 18. Okay, 55. And what's the last thing? A lot of people forget this.
ISO.
Nope, you gotta get close. All right, so half the group can be over here, half the group can be over there. Awesome. Okay, so now let's do everything the opposite. Go up to f13. Put your lens at 18. And now when you take your picture, you're going to be back here. Okay? So everybody do that, please. Here's your assignment. I want you to go around the school and take 2 pictures of each situation. The first photo is some items with a shallow depth of field. The second photo would be the same items with a deep depth of field. Things like lockers, or people standing in a row in the hallway, or the tables in the cafeteria, or the lines along the floor in the gym, all those sorts of things, right? So 2 photos of each. One of a shallow depth of field, the other one with deep depth of field.
Two photos
Of each. Yeah. Okay, because that's part of your assignment, is to provide the same situation, one with shallow, one with deep. Okay?